Now we're going to kind of go over the things that we have seen from every department as really kind of common, simple errors that are things that can really hold up the process, especially when we only have that 3-hour docketing process. And clerk of the board is fantastically detail oriented. They catch everything. So if you have really detail oriented people on your teams, this is going to be a great opportunity for them to give that final check before everything gets finalized and docketed, to make sure that some of these really easy fixes, easy mistakes are caught early, and then that way we're not all scrambling at the last minute to get them some of the updated documents that they need. So with that, I think Domingo, or is it Vince going first? Vince.
So Domingo, thank you very much for clarifying with me. So earlier I mentioned that if it's a second hearing, it should not be included. It actually should be included. Thank you, Domingo. So acronyms. So Tegan did touch on this earlier, but I wanted to follow up and raise a couple more points. Oftentimes we forget that the reader may not be as technically savvy as the author, and we'll begin to use acronyms as a way to get our message across. What may be second language to us isn't exactly English to others, and it's for that reason that the board letter manual, which is approved by the CAO, actually highlights that each section of a board letter should spell out an acronym. So if you're going to say luge in the overview, you need to spell it out. And then if you go to the background and you use luge again, you need to spell it out. And of course, same rules follow for the remainder of the board letter. And always spell it out first, and then in parentheses, use the acronym. And then big C, little c. So how many of you guys have heard of the big C, little c controversy? Few of us, okay. So what we wanted to touch on was the difference between a capital C when used in county and a lowercase c when used in county. Capital C's should be used only when referencing the entity, County of San Diego. An example of when you would use that is the county has great staff. You know, we're talking about the entity, we're talking about the entire enterprise, we're referencing who we work for, that's a capital C. An example of when a lowercase c is used would be describing the region. So you could say the county, lowercase c, has 18 cities. That would be an example. So pop quiz time. This is a trick question. Big C or little c for the Board of Supervisors is one decision-making body within the county. What is it? Lowercase? Who said depends? You got it. It depends. And the reason it depends is because county can be used as an entity because the board is one decision-making body within the entity. There are multiple. There's the director, commissions, and so forth. And then it's also within the region because a decision-making body could be in one of the incorporated cities. So that's when you would also be able to use it as a lowercase c. So again, when using big C or little c, keep in mind what the context is, who exactly you're referring to. Is it the region as a whole? Is it the entity? And then finally, if you're confused and you want to use the little c, you could always also use region. Sarah has indicated that she prefers to see region as opposed to within the unincorporated county, which would be little c. And with that, we'll hand it over to Domingo.
Hi everybody, for those that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Domingo Vigil. I am a program coordinator with the Luge office. I used to be a staff officer not too long ago, so I have experience pretty much with every single department in Luge reviewing board letters. So I'd like to focus on a few other things that are kind of the common mistakes that we see in board letters. First of all, I'll talk about attachments. One of the most common mistakes that we see in attachments is that the titles don't match. For example, if you reference an attachment in the board letter and you say, for example, if it's an ordinance and you say the title of the ordinance and then parentheses attachment A, and then you go to the list of attachments on the bottom of the board letter, it's a different title. And then you go to the actual ordinance, to the attachment, and it's actually a different title. So we end up with 3 different titles in the whole board letter. So this is very important to always double check that your titles match and to use it consistently. Another thing about attachment is that the attachment should follow the board letter in a logical order. So for example, when you have your list of attachments at the end of the board letter and you're starting with attachment A, that attachment A should be the first one that you reference in your board letter. So if you're referencing the attachments in the board letter, you shouldn't start by, blah, blah, blah document, parentheses attachment B. That should not be your first reference. The first attachment that you reference should be attachment A. So following that logical order throughout the board letter. Also, do not reference attachments in the overview. The attachments are really supporting documents that will add to the details that would really go in the background section. The overview, like James explained, is really an executive summary or a synthesis of what you're trying to accomplish with the board letter, what's being presented before the board. So it's not a place to reference attachments. You can maybe talk about the documents if you need to, but don't reference attachments. Also, labeling attachments. All the attachments should be clearly labeled on the upper, your right, so the upper right-hand corner of the page with Arial, all caps, 12-point bold font. So this is something that we see a lot of times missing in attachments. Also, all text must be in black, no color in the header, and we're talking about the attachment label specifically. And also, if an attachment document has its own attachment within that attachment, don't call it attachment because it will get confusing. We refer to that attachment within an attachment as an exhibit. So that's also an important thing. And those should also be clearly labeled. As far as pagination goes for the attachments, it should follow the attachment title. So if it's attachment A, pagination should be A1, page 2, A2, and so on and so forth. Attachment B, B1, B2, etc. Another common question that we get as far as attachment, providing copies of the attachment. If attachments total 20 to 50 pages, and that's 10 pieces of paper double-sided, supply copies of the attachments to the clerk of the board office and notify your staff officer that you have done so by the delivery deadline, which is what? What's the delivery deadline for attachments when you have to deliver copies? Does anybody know? It's 4 p.m. on docket day. So clerk of the board has to receive printed copies of the attachments when required for 4 p.m. the day of docket. So if you have 9 pages of attachments total, you don't need to provide those printed copies. It's okay. But if you have 10 or more pieces of paper, total attachments, then you need to provide those copies. And again, it's the department's responsibility to make sure that those copies get to the clerk of the board's office. Obviously, we're happy to assist. So say if you know that we're going to be in your department the day before and you have them ready, you can check with us and see if we're going to be at the CAC, and we're happy to deliver them for you. But ultimately, you're responsible for making those arrangements. And again, everything within the timeline so that we don't miss our deadlines. You can please refer to the board letter manual for all the details on every aspect of the board letters that we're highlighting. That should be your go-to document whenever there are questions or if you're confused about something. So please make sure that you reference that. Also, if an attachment is very large, so if it's more than 50 pages, or if it's like an oversized map, for example, You can contact your staff officer to discuss delivery methods, but the clerk of the board can accept CDs when that's the case. They only ask that the CD, again, is clearly labeled with the board letter, title, and the attachments. And again, you should be coordinating that with your staff officer. Another thing that we wanted to highlight is for 2 hearing items. So like Vince later clarified, in the overview section, you do need to explain that it's a 2 hearing item, and you do need to list what's happening on each one of those 2 dates, because that will really help clarify what the whole process is for that item. So for example, you can say today's request requires 2 steps. On July 4th, the board will blah, 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 blah. Then on July 20th, the board will blah, 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 blah. So your 2 hearings should be clearly explained as part of the overview. Also, when you have 2 hearing items, check with your staff officer on any potential conflicts for the board dates that you're selecting. This could be that, it's a 4-vote item, and maybe one of the supervisors is not going to be present, or something like that. So always check with your staff officer to make sure that there are no conflicts with the dates that you're proposing for your board letter when it's a 2 hearing item. That really applies for all the board letters regardless, but especially for 2 hearing items. Another thing is legal ads. So some items such as fee increases and ordinances require publication of legal notice in a newspaper well in advance of the board meeting, anywhere from 5 to 31 days. So always check your board letter manual for specific requirements, and check with counsel just to make sure that you know exactly how many days in advance you need to publish this ad. And this is something that clerk of the board takes care of, but the department needs to prepare the legal ad request and the notice of public hearing, and it needs to be submitted to clerk of the board 7 working days prior to the publication date. So for example, if you have a board letter that is going to the board on July 4th and it requires a 30-day notice, then it should be noticed by June 4th, which means that it should be that the clerk of the board needs to receive your legal ad request 7 days prior to June 4th. So taking all of those deadlines into account and working backwards to make sure that you have enough time to prepare for your board letter ad. Also, send these documents directly to the clerk of the board when you're requesting a legal ad. Send them to LS Docs and copy your staff officer. That way we'll know that it's in the process and that you already took care of it with clerk of the board. Is anybody familiar with LS Docs? Has anybody used that email address other than previous staff officer Eric Lardy? Okay, so LS Docs is an email address that you can use to submit documents to the clerk of the board. So, and it's just that lsdocs@sdcounty.ca.gov. So this is where you would send your legal ad requests, and please, again, copy your staff officer.